Welcome to Artificial Fluency, where we explore the fascinating intersections of human behavior, technology, and neuroscience. I'm your host, John, and with me today is our AI co-host, Emma. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that affects virtually everyone in our modern world, dopamine addiction. Emma, what makes this topic particularly relevant today?
You know, John, what's fascinating is how our modern digital landscape has created what neuroscientists call a dopamine economy. Our brains are constantly being hijacked by notifications, social media likes, and endless scrolling. But before we dive into that, let's help our listeners understand what dopamine actually is.
Great point. Can you break down the basics of dopamine for our listeners?
Think of dopamine as your brain's reward chemical, but it's actually much more complex than that. It's not just about pleasure, it's about anticipation, motivation, and learning. Imagine you're hungry and smell your favorite food cooking. That surge of excitement and anticipation, that's largely dopamine at work.
That's really interesting. So it's not just about the reward itself, but the anticipation of the reward.
Exactly. And this is where modern technology becomes particularly powerful. Our phones, social media, and games are specifically designed to create these anticipation loops. Every time we pull to refresh our social media feed, there's that moment of anticipation. Will there be new likes, new comments, new content?
Thoughtfully, it's almost like a slot machine in our pockets.
That's a perfect analogy, John. Just like slot machines, our apps are designed to give us unpredictable rewards. Sometimes you refresh and find something exciting, sometimes nothing. This unpredictability actually makes the behavior more addictive than if we got rewards every single time.
Let's talk about the science behind this. What's actually happening in our brains during these dopamine cycles?
It's fascinating, really. When we receive a notification, our brain releases a small amount of dopamine. But here's the key. The release actually begins in anticipation of the notification. Over time, our brains can become desensitized, requiring more stimulation to achieve the same effect.
Sort of like building up a tolerance?
Precisely. And this is where the addiction cycle begins. But it's important to note that this isn't just about willpower. We're dealing with fundamental brain chemistry. Our prehistoric brains simply weren't designed to handle the constant stimulation of the digital age.
Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll discuss the signs of dopamine addiction, and more importantly, what we can do about it. Welcome back to Artificial Fluency. Emma, let's talk about the signs of dopamine addiction. What should our listeners be looking out for?
There are several key indicators. First, do you feel anxious when separated from your phone? Do you find yourself checking social media reflexively, even when you're in the middle of other activities? Are you constantly seeking more intense experiences to feel the same level of satisfaction?
These sound like behaviors many of our listeners might recognize in themselves.
Exactly, and that's why awareness is so crucial. Another important sign is the impact on daily life. Are you having trouble focusing on work, sleeping problems, difficulty being present in conversations? These can all be signs of dopamine dysregulation.
Let's talk solutions. What can people do to break free from these addictive cycles?
This is where it gets really interesting. The key is not to eliminate dopamine. We need it for motivation and healthy functioning. Instead, we need to reset our dopamine baseline. This can be done through several evidence-based strategies.
Can you walk us through some of these strategies?
Of course. First, there's dopamine fasting, though I should note this term is a bit misleading. It's not about eliminating dopamine entirely, but rather about reducing artificial stimulation. This might mean taking a break from social media, turning off notifications, or having designated phone-free times.
What about more gradual approaches?
Absolutely. One effective strategy is what I call dopamine scheduling. This involves creating specific times for checking social media or emails, rather than responding to every notification immediately. It's also helpful to replace high stimulation activities with more natural dopamine sources. Exercise, nature walks, meaningful conversations, or learning new skills.
You know what I find fascinating? How this relates to productivity and creativity.
Yes. When we're constantly seeking quick dopamine hits, we often lose the ability to focus on longer-term, more meaningful rewards. This affects everything from our attention span to our ability to solve complex problems.
As we start wrapping up, what's one key message you'd like our listeners to take away?
I think it's important to understand that technology isn't inherently bad. It's about finding balance. Small changes can make a big difference. Start with one simple change, like not checking your phone for the first hour after waking up, and build from there.
And remember, if you're struggling with serious addiction issues, professional help is available and valuable.
Absolutely. This isn't about shame or blame. It's about understanding our brain chemistry and making informed choices about our digital consumption.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the neuroscience of dopamine to practical strategies for building healthier digital habits. Emma, any final thoughts?
Just that awareness is the first step. Understanding how our brains work can help us make better choices about our technology use. And remember, it's okay to start small. Even minor changes can have significant impacts over time.
Thank you for this fascinating discussion, Emma, and thank you to our listeners for joining us on Artificial Fluency. Don't forget to subscribe and join us next week for another deep dive into the intersection of human behavior and technology.
Until then, stay curious and stay mindful.